The first time the call came, it rang only once and stopped, like someone knocking and running away. I was standing at the sink, my hands submerged in cloudy water, the smell of soap sharp and clean against the damp air of the small apartment. Outside, the evening traffic hummed like a tired insect, and the sky pressed low against the buildings. I wiped my hands on a towel and stared at the phone as if it might accuse me of something. The screen was dark. No missed call. No number. Nothing. I told myself it was a glitch. Phones did that sometimes. Lives did too. I had learned to ignore small disturbances. Since my father's death 3 years earlier, I had become skilled at it. I woke, went to work, came home, cooked simple meals, and slept. I paid rent on time. I smiled when required. I kept my grief folded neatly, like a letter never sent, tucked into a drawer I did not open. The second call came the next night, at exactly the same hour. One ring. Silence. This time I was ready, my phone already in my hand, my thumb hovering above the screen. Still nothing. I laughed under my breath, a brittle sound that surprised me with its sharpness. I was becoming someone who jumped at shadows. On the third night, the phone rang twice. I answered without thinking. Hello. My voice sounded older than I felt, worn at the edges. For a moment there was only breathing on the other end. Slow, uneven, as if the person was walking uphill. Who is this? I asked, irritation creeping in, trying to cover something softer and more dangerous. Do you still remember the smell of rain on hot concrete? A man's voice said. The question landed in me like a stone dropped into still water. My chest tightened. I knew that voice. I had not heard it in 10 years, but memory does not obey time. It rushed forward, vivid and disobedient. Adam, I whispered. He exhaled, a sound between relief and pain. You do remember. I sat down on the edge of the couch. My knees felt weak, as if the floor had shifted slightly out of place. How did you get this number? I kept it, he said simply. I never changed my phone. I closed my eyes. The past rose up around me with merciless clarity. Adam, with his restless hands and eyes that seemed to be searching for something even when he was still. Adam, who had loved me fiercely and imperfectly, who had left with a promise that sounded like certainty and felt like fear. You shouldn't have called, I said, though my voice betrayed me. I know, he replied. I told myself that for years. But then my doctor said a lot of things very quickly, and suddenly time felt loud. Like it was shouting at me. My heart began to pound, heavy and insistent. What do you mean? There was a pause. I imagined him somewhere far away, perhaps sitting on a hospital bed, perhaps standing by a window like he used to, one hand in his pocket, the other tapping an invisible rhythm. I don't have much of it left, he said. The room tilted. I pressed my free hand against my stomach, breathing carefully. How much? They don't like giving numbers, he said, almost apologetically. But not long enough. I swallowed. Why call me? Because there are things I never said, he replied. And because you are the bravest person I know, even if you don't believe it. I almost laughed at that. Brave was not the word I would have chosen for myself. Careful, perhaps. Quiet. Avoidant. We talked for hours that night. About nothing and everything. About the way our favorite cafe had closed, about his sister's children, about my job and how it drained me without quite fulfilling me. We circled around the past like two people afraid to touch a bruise. When the call ended, the apartment felt unbearably silent. I lay awake until morning, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying old scenes with new understanding. Adam leaving because he was afraid of becoming his father. When the train finally stopped, it did so with a tired sigh, as if it too had traveled too far carrying too many stories. I stayed seated long after the doors opened, watching people step onto the platform with certainty I no longer recognized. The station smelled of rust, damp stone, and old announcements that never fully faded. My ticket lay crumpled in my hand, its edges soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. I had memorized every letter on it during the journey, afraid that if I stopped looking, the destination would disappear. I had not been back to this city in 12 years. The streets outside the station were narrower than I remembered, or maybe I had grown wider inside, carrying more weight than before. Each step felt like a quiet argument between who I was and who I had been. Cars passed, horns blaring impatiently, life moving forward without waiting for me to catch up. I pulled my coat tighter, even though the air was not cold. Some chills came from places fabric could not reach. The house stood at the end of the lane, just as it always had, its paint more faded now, its gate slightly crooked. The mango tree in the yard leaned heavily to one side, its branches older, slower, but still alive. I stood across the street for a long time, afraid that if I went closer, the past would rush out and swallow me whole. I rang the bell. The door opened slowly, cautiously, as if the house itself was unsure about me. Then I saw her. My mother looked smaller, her shoulders curved inward, her hair streaked with silver she had once been so careful to hide. For a moment, she only stared. Then her hand flew to her mouth, and a sound escaped her that was half breath, half sob. "You came," she said. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. She reached for me, hesitated, then pulled me into her arms. Her body trembled, and I realized she was crying silently, the way people do when they have learned not to make noise with their pain. I closed my eyes and breathed her in, the familiar scent of oil and soap and something unmistakably her. My chest ached as if something locked inside it had finally broken free. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. The same sofa with the torn armrest. The same clock ticking too loudly on the wall. And there, on the shelf, my father's photograph, his eyes steady, his smile incomplete. I felt his absence like a physical presence, pressing against my ribs. "You didn't have to come," my mother said softly, following my gaze. "I know," I replied. "But I needed to." That night, sleep avoided me. I lay in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles above me. Memories crept in uninvited. My father teaching me how to ride a bicycle, his hand firm on my back. His voice calling my name when dinner was ready. The night we argued, words thrown like knives, pride louder than love. The morning I left without saying goodbye. He died 3 months later. I had told myself I couldn't come to the funeral because of work, because of money, because of life. But the truth had been simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Afraid that if I came back, I would have to face what I had done. Afraid that forgiveness would not be waiting for me. The next morning, my mother placed a cup of tea in front of me. Her hands shook slightly. "You should visit him," she said, not looking up. I nodded. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt respectful rather than empty. I walked between the rows, my heart pounding harder with every step. When I reached his grave, my legs nearly gave way. His name was carved into stone now, permanent and undeniable. I knelt, my fingers brushing the cool surface. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The words felt small, insufficient, but they were all I had. I told him everything then. About my failures, about my loneliness, about the way his voice still guided me even when I pretended. Me letting him go because I was afraid of needing him more than he needed me. The calls became nightly. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes I did. Sometimes we sat in shared silence, listening to each other breathe. I learned the sounds of his pain, the way it sharpened his voice on bad days and softened it on others. I told him things I had never told anyone, about my fear of becoming invisible, about the way my father's absence still echoed in me like an empty room. One night, after a particularly long pause, he said, "Will you come see me?" The question hung between us, fragile and heavy. "I don't know if I can," I said truthfully. "I've built a life that doesn't include sudden departures." "I'm not asking you to stay," he said gently. "Just to come." I stared at the dark window, my reflection faint and uncertain. Fear pressed against my ribs, familiar and persuasive. But beneath it, something else stirred. A longing, sharp and undeniable. "I'll come," I said. The journey felt unreal, like moving through a dream with too much light. The hospital was smaller than I had imagined, its corridors painted a pale, hopeful green. Adam was thinner, his face sharper, but his eyes were the same. When he saw me, they filled with tears he did not try to hide. "You came," he said, as if surprised by his own hope. "So did you," I replied, and we both smiled. We spent days together. We talked, we laughed, we argued gently about old memories, each of us remembering things slightly differently. He showed me the scar from his surgery, and I traced it with my eyes, aware of the fragile body beneath the familiar skin. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across his bed, he took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip weaker than I remembered. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About a lot of things." "So was I answered. He shook his head. "I thought leaving would protect you. But all it did was leave us both alone." Tears slid down my face, unashamed. I thought letting you go was strength. But it was fear dressed up as dignity. We held each other's gaze, the truth raw and painful and strangely freeing. On his last night, the room was filled with the soft hum of machines. He slept fitfully, his breath shallow. I sat beside him, my fingers wrapped around his, my heart aching with a grief that was already blooming. He opened his eyes just before dawn. "Are you here?" he murmured. "I'm here," I said. "Then I'm not afraid," he whispered, and his fingers tightened once, then relaxed. When the nurse came, I stood back, my body numb, my mind quiet in a way that felt unnatural. I signed papers, thanked people, walked outside into a morning that looked exactly like every other morning. I returned home days later, carrying his words with me like a fragile inheritance. The apartment felt different now. Smaller, perhaps, or maybe I was larger. I began to notice things I had ignored before. The neighbors' laughter, the way light moved across the floor in the afternoons, the quiet courage it took to choose connection over safety. Weeks passed, then months. One evening, as rain fell hard against the pavement below, my phone rang. A single ring. I smiled, tears gathering, and let it ring. Some calls were meant to be answered only once. Others were meant to change you. Not to hear it. Tears blurred my vision, but I did not wipe them away. Some grief needed to be seen. As I stood to leave, a voice behind me said my name. I turned. She stood there uncertainly, her hands clasped together, her eyes searching my face. Sarah. Time had changed her, but not completely. Her hair was shorter now, her expression more guarded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I heard you were back," she said finally. "I just arrived," I replied. "I'm glad," she said, though her tone carried more complexity than the word suggested. We walked together without deciding to, our steps falling into an old rhythm. She told me about her life, about the school where she taught, about her small apartment filled with books and plants. I listened, noticing the pauses where she left things unsaid. "I was angry with you," she said at last. "I know," I answered. "You left without explaining, without trusting me with the truth." "I didn't know how to stay," I said quietly. "And I didn't know how to leave without hurting everyone." She stopped walking. "You still hurt us," she said. "Just from farther away." The honesty stung, but it felt deserved. "I've thought about you every day," I said. "Not always kindly, not always fairly, but always." She looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression softened. "I missed you," she admitted. Even when I told myself I didn't. Over the next few days, we found ourselves drawn together again. We talked late into the night, our words careful at first, then braver. We laughed at memories that once hurt too much to touch. We argued, gently but honestly, about the choices we had made. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop watching the city lights flicker on, she asked, "Do you think people can come back from who they used to be?" I considered the question. "I think they can," I said. "But not without paying attention to who they became along the way." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the lights below. "I don't want promises," she said. "I want truth." "You have it," I replied. "Even if it's messy." The night before I was meant to leave, my mother sat beside me, folding clothes she did not need to fold. "You seem lighter," she said. "I feel heavier," I admitted. "But in a good way." She smiled faintly. "Your father would be proud of you." The words broke something open inside me. I realized then that coming back had not been about erasing the past. It had been about finally carrying it properly. At the station, as the train prepared to depart, Sarah stood with me. The air was thick with things we had not decided yet. "Will you come back?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "And this time, I won't disappear." She smiled, a real smile, and reached for my hand. "That's enough for now." As the train pulled away, I watched the city recede, feeling both loss and hope settle into me side by side. I understood something then that had taken me years to learn. Life does not give us clean endings or perfect returns. It gives us moments of courage, fragile and fleeting, and asks us what we will do with